I want to show you this little pincushion barrel thing again. Take a look at these two light poles, which are pretty well perfectly vertical in Jack's photo, close enough to vertical. When you pincushion it, they should go out towards the corners, like everything else. It's like a big rubber sheet. You pull the corners out, and these, now let's go back. This should bend a little bit away from the, should go like that. Should bend like that. Because it's like it's on a big rubber sheet with everything else that's real, and when you correct it, it should go back to being the real pole or the real sign. When you correct it, of course, you're bending it in the other way. So what was quickly turning into an impossible stem and sign, I chose two particularly clear frames. Excuse me. Originally I did this with a couple of frames, and I changed one of them and redid it to with an even clearer frame just a few months ago. These are the ones that I chose. Frame 193, which has, and I'm looking at this side of the sign. Okay, this pole. You notice how it's pretty rectangular, you've got to say. To me, it looks very rectangular, that sign. There's no, it's not sort of bent, it's not wobbly, it doesn't look like the Bothan photograph where it's just about having trouble standing up. That's a very beautiful rounded sign. Of course, these panels down the side, we've never figured out what these panels are. Why there's a strip of light material there and a light material there when it's just a big piece of plyboard. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Here's frame 228, so he's panned now across, the limo's coming out, and we've got this, piece of fiction evolving back here. And the sign is now just about into the sprocket hole region where you'd expect a fair amount of pincushion pulling it this way. And it's still pretty vertical. Of course, you've got to make sure you get the backgrounds right before you can say whether it's still vertical or not. But it still doesn't seem to be, it should be twisted out of shape. A right angle should be twisted. Okay, when you do a pincushion, if you look at the edge of the pincushion frame, it comes a little point. So a right-angled corner actually becomes an acute angle, a smaller than 90-degree angle, which you'd expect for the corner of the sign should be doing opposite things. And these two frames. So the first step, of course, for the two frames was to get rid of the pincushion. That's not the frame, that's just the little video clip from before. And then just to make sure, which is a step I didn't do originally, I corrected the perspective so that it acted as if the camera was pointing at the exact same position for both frames. Right? And this is just to remind you that we can do that. And this is to remind you we can do the pincushion distortion. And so what you should have are two frames in which the camera may as well have been glued to a tripod pointing in the same direction. Okay? The image should look the same. So people will move, and the limo will move, and the motorcycles will move, and people might even wave. Of course, none of them wave. But if they were waving, you would see them waving. But the camera is pointing in exactly the same direction. So everything should line up perfectly. If it's real. Of course, once you do all that, you still have to worry about the camera could have been rotated, and of course you've got to make sure you overlay them at the same position. And everything that's fixed, that's not moving like limousines and people, should be identical. They should stay in the same place. And so they're the two bits of frame, and you should be able to overlay them perfectly. So you notice here you've got the holes in the wall, which the bushes are quite prickly, aren't they? We measured all those holes just the other day and got prickled, whatever they've got now, hollies or something. The holes in the wall, the top of the wall, the edge of the wall, and these bushes. Do you see that little highlight on the bush, whatever that bush is called, that reddish sort of bush? Okay, I'll believe you. I'll just call it the red bush. I'm not a botanist. And the bushes and so on. Now I'll show you a different version of this shortly, where you don't have to try and see if every single point lines up. You can just compare them. But everything should overlay, and as you see, everything comes into nice, beautiful alignment, as I'll show you in a moment. And the Stemmons freeway sign, if it's a real sign, should come into perfect alignment. And so when you bring the backgrounds into alignment, you say, what's going on here? And that's appropriate sort of expression. When this was discovered, I'm sure heads rolled when this was discovered, that there is something wrong with the Stebbins freeway sign. Let me show you, and I think it's the blunder of the century. If the film is the hoax of the century, don't worry about the shadow of the tree, because the tree sways in the breeze a little bit, and this is like a second later, 2 seconds later. But you can really pick any point that's fixed. Now you've got to worry there's some ghost image here. In fact, that's the Texas highway sign down here in the for the Stebbins freeway sign. But apart from the things that are coming through as ghost image, you can try and line up any of those features, this bush, or this corner, okay? And just make sure, even the shadow, make sure that they're properly rotated and overlaid. So then you can look at the sign. Now, it's flopping around. It's not just the pole of the sign, it's the edge of the sign, but not the top of the sign. Okay, so this is where the sign should be stationary. It should be a real sign in this frame, not in the raw frame as you have on the Zapruder film. To make that a bit clearer, here's a blue line going down through these 2 holes in the wall. Here's a blue line going through that corner of the wall where it turns around the corner, the edge of the wall, I guess. And here's a red line that's just roughly above the top of the sign, just as a horizontal reference. And these orangey yellow lines, which colour are they? Orange or yellow? I can't tell, I'm colourblind. They follow the pole and just to the right of the right edge of the sign, which in the first one, the limo's behind it, and I'm just trying to figure out where the umbrella is in the other one. It must be right down here. And umbrella comes up, I guess. Yeah, the umbrella. I never noticed there was no umbrella in the first frame that I used. You can see the angles are wrong. Now, if the sign was just moving left and right, there'd be no problem. Because if the sign was here and the background was over there, if you close one eye, or you can put your finger up in front of your head, if you move your head, your finger moves sideways. Right? You move that way, your finger moves the other way, up and down, which is called the parallax effect. You can make things move left and right and up and down. You can't make them tilt just by moving your head. You can try it at home for as many hours as you like. You can't make the angle change by moving your head. Now, so it can move left and right because Zapruder was filming, and he's apparently a real person on a real pedestal filming. Could have moved his camera because he's got to turn around and not bump Sitzman off the pedestal and so on. And that's quite possible. You can't have this angle. You can't make this angle wrong. And in fact, when you go back and look at the original frames, you realise that it was aligned perfectly with the background in the raw frames. The point about this is, this now points over here in this frame, and it points over there for that frame. But before you take the pincushion distortion out, if you just laid a ruler against them, they would point to the same position on the frame. Okay? Because pincushion distortion correction has bent vertical lines like that. So whoever created the film, or put the Stebbins sign over the top, for whatever purpose, put it in the film without realising that there was this pincushion distortion that would have to be introduced or accounted for down the track. Okay? And it really is... It really is, to my mind, the strongest evidence that the film was at least altered, that this sign was put over the top of whatever was there. Presumably the sign as it originally was. And people have speculated about this for many years. Question is, why wasn't it fixed? And here's what I thought was fairly impressive. This issue, dated November 29, Josiah Thompson's clincher was that it was actually printed on Saturday night. The problem he had with it being printed on Saturday night is there's actually a photo in here of Ruby shooting Oswald, which would have been an amazing prediction if. But I'll admit that it was probably all printed by Sunday, because people were getting it by Tuesday morning and it was being distributed on Monday. So I'll accept that it was probably printed on the first weekend. And so if David excuses me for manhandling his copy here, these three apparently innocent frames here locked it in. There they are, scanned and reproduced over there. The mistake was it shows both sides of the sign. And in fact, there's two versions here of the left-hand side of the sign. It's basically locked in. The fact that the sign looked like this and it was so sort of square, and here again, already in those first couple of days, you have this weird panel, light panel on the side of the sign, which has no physical explanation. You can't, as Jack has pointed out many times, you can't splice together those pieces of plyboard without a metal bracket. In fact, the reason I was taking photographs of the sign that's there now down at Fort Worth Turnpike sign is because it has a lot of these metal brackets on the back that's splicing pieces of wood together when we noticed the little rain sensor up on the corner. So that's locked in. That's why it wasn't fixed. That's why it wasn't changed. Once you've locked something in, once you've distributed millions of copies of Life magazine, that's it. What appears in here is basically it. Anything in here can't be changed, so you better make sure what is in here is correct. And I hate to be the person that made that mistake. You can also compare it with that 1963 panorama. And here it is. This is the Zapruder panorama, a little bit bigger version of it. You can see I've now taken away the other one, which I'll show you in a moment. And you can see how all of these ghost images come together. There's a bit of grass, there's a bit of grass. There's a bit of that building up there. There's the top of that concrete thing. There are windows. There's some more windows. So beautiful. Technically, it was all those ghost panels, after you take everything into account. Beautifully correct. Here's the sign. The first thing you notice about the sign is that my magical programs for giving you this seamless panorama failed for the sign simply because it was in two different places at two different times. In different frames, it's in different positions, and that's why this is the only place in the whole panorama that I fail. And here, and the edge. It's blurry because it doesn't match, even though it's got a program in there to try and smoothly blend. You can see it's tried its trickery here, and it's not convincing because the sign is not in the same place in two different frames. If you compare that to the 1963 panorama, without the Zapruder overlay, you can see here the top of the windows, the holes in the wall, these holes in the wall. In fact, the whole panorama matches up to this accuracy. These signs, this lamp pole, these signs, even the grass in the thing, and you can't see the curb, and this curb, and the tree, and the bushes, what you can see of them. Because it's only 5 days later, so they still look the same, basically. And there's one thing flashing out at you, which is this sign. In this one, it angles down slightly. Why is that? Because Zapruder's looking down on the sign, and the sign is facing the road. These signs, they're not exactly perpendicular to the road, they're angled to the road so drivers coming down the street can see the sign. That's usually the reason why you put a street sign next to the street. This sign looks like it's, here's the road, and the sign's sort of at a 45-degree angle. You'd almost have to get past the sign to see what's on it. It's also too wide. This sign, when you measure it, you can use photogrammetry, I guess you could call it. I'd never used that word until Jack told me the story. You can measure the sign, and it's 8 foot by 4 foot. And I did that after Jack had already said, well, these pieces of plyboard are 8 foot by 4 foot. This one, the genuine one, comes out to be 8 foot by 4 foot when you do all of the three-dimensional trigonometry, which you don't really want to do. If you had enough trouble with two-dimensional trigonometry at school, you really don't want to start tackling three-dimensional trigonometry. But you can do it, figure out what angle it's on, and it comes out to be 8 foot by 4 foot. It looks like a genuine piece of sign. This one is too wide, slightly in the wrong position, but you can get that from parallax. And it's too wide, and the top of the sign is wrong. So this completes the work that Jack had done already in showing that this sign is in the wrong position and the wrong geometry. The sign is not correct. There is a bit of a catch, and someone did point out the other day, or a couple of weeks ago, I don't have any clearer version of this photo, but maybe it looks like there is some digging around the bottom of this sign. Maybe they put a new sign in. However, at the Conspiracy Museum in Dallas, they have a huge photograph that someone donated, which shows the Stemmen sign. It's taken from just over here somewhere. I don't know. Taken the day after the assassination, I believe, and it doesn't seem to be any piles of dirt on the ground. So maybe this is just a bit of an artifact. The argument goes, there are many stories about this Stemmen sign, about that it was moved, it was taken out, it was put back up again by the FBI and taken down, and someone else put it up. Then they got rid of it altogether. I think those stories were all generated because the sign is just wrong. We don't have to compare it to the panorama to know that the sign is wrong. The sign is internally wrong in the film. In two different frames of the film, the sign does not appear the same. Okay, it's not the same sign. So we don't need to do the comparison. But this story of the sign always being moved and so on, I think some details of that were added in to confuse the issue that the sign was clearly wrong. The other comment, of course, if these are piles of dirt, where are the piles corresponding to where it was before it was rotated? What do other films say? And I'll say something about that in a moment. An interesting suggestion that someone made to me, I won't mention who it was at the time, but apparently there's some question that the sign even existed at the time of the assassination, which I thought was pretty bizarre because you see it in so many photographs. So I actually went through Grodin's book, and page after page I noticed how many photographs failed to see the sign just on this side or just on that side, just on that side. And there's maybe 6 or 8 or 10 photos which show the sign. Many photos just miss the sign. I said, well, that's a little bit strange. And just a little while ago I thought I'd check this out. How would you know if there was a sign in Dealey Plaza before the assassination? Well, a long time ago I asked Gary Mack, I said, are there any photographs before the assassination showing the Stemmen sign? And he gave me the phone number of the Dallas Parks Authority or something and said, call them up yourself. So I wasn't sure, but then it struck me just recently that the one person who would know whether there was a sign there was the guy who had to mow the lawn around the sign every day. Hudson, the groundskeeper. I think 6 years he was working there, and I guess when you mow the lawn around things every day, you know where everything is. And so I had a look at what he had to say. Talking about the signs here. How do you pronounce this guy's name? Liebler? Liebler? I don't know how to pronounce it. I've only read these things. Okay, there were 2 signs. One was right along and the other one further up. He's having trouble finding the signs in these photographs because they're trying to explain where everything is. They have moved that R.L. Thornton freeway sign and put up a Stemmen sign. They have moved it? Yes, sir. And that was the end of the... didn't go any further than that. On another topic. The guy that worked there for 6 years before the assassination said they put up a Stemmen sign since the assassination. That's pretty bizarre. And they moved the other sign. Presumably this guy knows which sign he's talking about. He'd had to look at the damn sign for the last 6 years, mowing the lawn and weeding the flowers and so on.
But it's in another spot, right?
Yeah, there's a number of photographs which show it. There's many. There's Bond photos, Bronson, there's Willis, Betts. Cushion it, they should go out towards the corners like everything else. It's like a big rubber sheet. You pull the corners out and these, now let's go back. This should bend a little bit away from the, it should go like that. Should bend like that. because it's like it's on a big rubber sheet with everything else that's real, and when you correct it, it should go back to being the real pole or the real sign. When you correct it, of course, you're bending it in the other way. So what was quickly turning into an impossible stem and sign, I chose two particularly clear frames. Excuse me. Originally I did this with a couple of frames, and I changed one of them and redid it to with an even clearer frame just a few months ago. These are the ones that I chose. Frame 193, which has, and I'm looking at this side of the sign. Okay, this pole. You notice how it's pretty rectangular, you've got to say. To me, it looks very rectangular, that sign. It's not sort of bent, it's not wobbly, it doesn't look like the Bothan photograph where it's just about having trouble standing up. That's a very beautiful rounded sign. Of course, these panels down the side, we've never figured out what these panels are. Why there's a strip of light material there and a light material there when it's just a big piece of plyboard. I want to show you this little pincushion barrel thing again. Take a look at these two light poles, which are pretty well perfectly vertical in Jack's photo, close enough to vertical. When you pin, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Here's frame 228, so he's panned now across, the limo's coming out, and we've got this piece of fiction evolving back here. And the sign is now just about into the sprocket hole region where you'd expect a fair amount of pincushion pulling it this way. And it's still pretty vertical. Of course, you've got to make sure you get the backgrounds right before you can say whether it's still vertical or not. But it still doesn't seem